Good morning, Stockholm, and actually all other European countries who are here with us today. And welcome to the Solitas crash course number 3, and it's called Data Mesh. I am Maiju Samberg, and this is my colleague, Antti Loukiala, and we will give a little bit more about our background soon. But today we will have quite a hot topic in our hands. There are actually over 300 people listening to us today, also here in Sweden, or live, some of you. So the topics raises a lot of interest, and we've been talking with this team around with Antti for a few years already. Have you actually read the book? Very short, hands up here in the live. Yeah. Me and Antti have actually the privilege to actually been practically like using kind of the approach of the data mesh in our real project work, and that's why we are here today, also share our learnings and knowledge about data mesh. But today we have our agenda. We have a short introduction to data mesh done by Antti. Then we'll share our approach, how to get started with data mesh. And then we will talk a little bit about the platform, how to build the self-serve platform. And then we will talk about empowering the owner, have some summary, and then we will have at the end time for questions. And for the online audience there, you can all the time use the chat function in the window that you're watching now, and just post your comments, your questions, and we will take them at the end of the event. All right, but I'm very happy to be here, and let's dive into the topic.
Yeah, so let me introduce my fellow speaker, Maiju. Maiju is a principal service designer here at Solita. She's based in Berlin, and I have had a privilege, like said, to work with Maiju on a data mesh project. So as you know, the data mesh is actually socio-technical paradigm. So there's a lot of emphasis on how do you organize around the data mesh, how do you design data products, how do you design the whole system, and what's the effect on the users. So therefore, there's a huge demand for design perspective to many things. Maiju has a background, of course, in service design, and she has been designing hospitals in Uganda, doing sustainable elevator business process modeling in China, and doing a UX design for a startup in Berlin. And background, she's actually a psychologist. So.
Yeah, and here is Antti Loukiala, and he's a data architect. He's actually in Tampere, Finland, but he is part of the Sweden team. And he's been working with the large Nordic organizations and companies for the past 6 years, building and designing data platforms in cloud. And now he's also diving into the kind of the opportunities of the data mesh. He is a platform architect, but I would say he is a human-centric engineer who has actually kind of the mind of the business or service designer. He's also co-host of the Data by Slice podcast, and they are actually mainly talking about the data mesh.
All right, so let's dive into it. So I understood that not many of you have read the book. There is a book out by Zhamak Dehghani, and I'll go now through the basics of data mesh, and along with it, I will give some ideas of what we have actually learned from when implementing these systems. So if we start from the from like the traditional, from where are we coming from? Why are we actually looking into data mesh? Where did this bring from? So this very oversimplified view of a typical centralized data flow is that you usually have, the black dots here represent the source systems. And on the left-hand side, you have the domain experts who are actually sitting very close to the applications, operating them, the people in business who actually put data into these applications. Usually the applications are actually owned by IT, and that's very typical. But if you look at the way how you usually do in a centralized system is that you have this a monolithic system in the middle that's actually doing the ingesting and storage and publishing the data sets, and whether it's creating reports or dashboards. And it's basically the business who is actually creating requirements for this centralized system, for the centralized team to actually create reports, which actually is the business who's using them in the end. If you have a small system and you have few sort of source systems and everything's working nicely, this might make actually perfect sense. But there is a little thing that kind of bothers me here as well, is that what we have seen is that the business and the IT are not actually working together. So there's like a division of this. And if you think about who owns the data, is it business or is it IT? And that is unclear a bit. So the IT is actually working with the data, they have capabilities to do it, but it's the business who owns it. And therefore you have this kind of bit of a divide between the two. Then another issue might rise if you have hundreds or if not thousands of source systems. So all of a sudden, if you have this centralized team who's doing the ingest and storage publish, you have to somehow manage the application landscape. Which sources do you actually integrate into? How do you manage all of this and so on? And what we have seen is that typically our customers have hundreds, if not thousands, of source systems, and it's a completely heterogeneous landscape, meaning that you have legacy applications, you have SaaS applications, you have in-house built applications, you have absolutely everything. And ingesting that data from there requires for the central team to actually understand the systems. You have to go into the domain, you have to understand what kind of data is in there, how do you actually modify it, and every time when you bring a new data set in, the complexity in the central system increases. There is fantastic tools coming out which actually speed up the development of these monolithic data warehouse systems or lake houses and such, which actually do speed it up quite well, but we're still speeding up the centralized system. So is there another way to do this? One way to do it is to start breaking these into pieces. So we go to the first principle of data mesh, which is the decentralized domain ownership. Basically, it means that we take the source system or source systems that are close to the domain. And the concept of domain is actually coming from domain-driven design, which is a book by Eric Evans published in 2003. So it has quite a long history where this is coming from. So the domain is you could say it's the business problem that you're focusing on. And that creates a context. What they talk about in a domain-driven design is a bounded context. It has its own language within the context, and that's where you have the domain expertise. You know what systems are being used, how are they being used, what kind of data is there, and all of that. So now we put the cross-functional team close to the source system or source systems and actually create these, start working with the data, start doing analytics and so on. And what we have noticed is that when we start moving into this direction, it takes teams around a year, some even year and a half, to just work with the data that they have. So they want to do analytics on the data that they're operating on. So that kind of tells a story that the data is actually kind of trapped in some of the source systems, whether it's marketing operating on their data or HR trying to figure out how to do better processes, how to do better flows. They don't have actually access to the data. So it's just simply connecting to the data, having analysts sitting next to the HR specialist or to the marketing specialist, allows them the possibility to have their own backlog, own their own problems, and actually work on the analytics. And like I said, it takes around a year for these teams to kind of get understanding of the data that they have and get the analytics going and so on. And after that year, they start looking outside of their own domain for data from outside. That's of course not always the case. Sometimes it starts with asking data from somewhere else, but that's what we see. Another thing which is really interesting, and we have witnessed this as well, is that in data mesh you have this concept called source-aligned data products. And what that means is that you have people sitting next to the source systems, and the idea is that they would be actually creating data products. I'll go into that a bit later. But the problem with that is that you're basically asking this team to create data sets, data products for someone else. So they don't have any incentive for themselves to actually do it. Why should we do it? We don't benefit anything from it. And we have actually witnessed this. There's ways to tackle it, but one very good way is to give incentive for the team itself to start actually working on analytics. I don't think it's not hard. You can definitely find it. So for example, if we need data from HR, we would ask HR, you know, if you would get this data set in a good way, could you run analytics on it? Would you be interested in something to help your processors or work on that way? And that creates incentive for that team to actually create the analytics and actually create the data product for others to use it. And there we actually, how to create value out of this? Well, the designers can help you with that. So, of course, there's multiple domains in a company. Usually you can find clues to the domains in the organization structure. It's not here, it's kind of the black dots being the source systems. It's kind of dictating that it's source system aligned, but that's not the case. It's just a simplified picture. So the organization structure gives clues to it, but it's not an absolute answer. So the domains have to be sort of, you have to discover them. I think it's hard to discover them out of scratch, to define them beforehand, and that's something that we have witnessed. So as soon as you take the business case to the table, what is the business case? What are you trying to actually solve? The domain starts to form quite naturally. So you shouldn't worry too much beforehand worrying about the domains. Of course, you want to do a mapping, look at the organization charts, look what's happening in it. But then once you take the business case and start solving it, it starts to become more clear and clear. So then comes the data as a product. I'm talking here data products and data as a products as synonyms. There is some talk in the community that these are two different things, but I'm using them interchangeably here. So what is the data as a product? Actually, the quantum to the core of a data as a product, it's not only data set. It's data, it's the code, it's the infrastructure. And they should be decoupled. So if we need to do changes to the data product that's on the left hand, you shouldn't worry how it's affecting the data product on the right hand side. So they should be decoupled. They should be independently deployable so that you can optimize each data as a product for the consumers who's using it. A lot of the ideas that you have in this second principle of data mesh is that there's the API first design. And actually the REST APIs, if we look at them, the first implementation was in 2000 by Salesforce. That might be a surprise to some of you. It was a surprise to me. And actually in 2000 it wasn't really usable, but you can imagine that in 22 years it has gone a long way. So there's a lot of there's a lot of insight that has been gathered from designing APIs. How do you develop them? How do you version them, and all of that? And you can apply many of the concepts into data as a product, or the sort of the end result of that. And and that brings many technical benefits, very good practices on how to do it. Something that we have seen is that when it comes to data, and data mesh also talks about polyglot access to the data, meaning that you should think about who's consuming the data and fit the structure of the data set into that. So meaning that if there's a lot of reporting that's going to be done, it should be released from a relational database. If it's maybe the data scientists want to access the files, maybe you even want to build a REST API on top of it, and that should come from the consumers of the data, and it should be built towards that. What we have discovered is that when you start your journey, keep the sort of agreed data standards very small, because if you start to support multiple different ways of releasing data, it becomes for the consumer really hard to consume them. So let's say one is in a Azure Data Lake, and the next one is in a Snowflake, and the third one is somewhere else. If you're consuming it, you have to actually connect to each one of these. So if you start small, say that everything has to be in let's say Azure Data Lake, or everything has to be in a Snowflake. And when there's a use case that's actually demanding something else, then start considering, okay, how can we expand this? How does this fit into this? You can, of course, have in a beginning few of the different options because you know your organizations and what are most likely to come up. But that's something, that's a good way to start going. Another thing that we see quite often, and which we think it's a good idea, it goes back to the same point, is that a lot of different companies are actually using data warehouses to release the data products. So you can build your data product with using any tool you want, but the actual end result has to be, well, not necessarily in a data warehouse, but these cloud strong relational databases, like for example Snowflake, which supports heavy queries and so on, or Synapse or Redshift. What that actually creates, it gives you a nice interface into all of the data sets, and you can do cross queries on them. So that's something that it's a good way to get going, to get started. But as you move along, you might have time series data. That time series database fits better. You might have data lakes there, and you want to release data from object storage and so on. So then you might want to start expanding it. And of course, one of the key things, which actually is very core to all of the principles, is the ownership. So you have to have the ownership very close to the source. That means that you have to have your own backlog. You have to be able to be in control of the data as a product that you're building. If you're not in control, it's not really your own, and then it's really hard to do that. We'll talk about the ownership a bit later, because we see it's being really corner to many of these. And then the third principle, which is the self-serve platform. The idea here, I think, which I want to highlight, is the self-serve part of it. So the idea is that if we look back at the centralized system, in a centralized system, basically the business was creating requirements for the central team to actually build the reports. So the reports are usually built in that central system. It's not that the business is using the central system to build the reports for themselves. Okay, the Power BIs and Tableaus and tools like that are pretty good at that. But the data mangling, the curation of the data, everything like that happens within the central system. Here, the idea of the self-serve platform kind of flips that. So it means that we have to create different kind of components for the different teams to actually utilize. And that means that the IT has to, or let's say the central team, the platform team, has to create different kind of components, tools, that allow the different domain teams to actually utilize the tools and then build the actual products themselves. And yet again, the ownership is here. So if I'm not actually building the data as a product, I'm not really owning it because it's someone else doing it. So the self-serve part is actually allowing me to be in full control of what I'm building and allowing me to own the data as a product. So if I need to change it, I can do it because I have the team, I have the capability, I have the tools to do it. So the ownership is yet again in there. And I think this is a pretty big change to how the platforms are not traditionally seen, but from a central point seen compared to the distributed one. And of course, everything requires governance. But I think the governance yet again changes. And this is the final principle of data mesh, which is the federated computational governance. So I think AWS says it really well. You want to manage, you want to govern the edge, you want to manage the edge. And what that means is that if we now look, what's really important is that the data products, how you release them, are standardized, are well-defined, are findable. But what happens inside of the domains, how do you actually build it, is less relevant. I don't mean that you want to let loose and not to have any governance on it. That's not my point. But what is the output of it? That has to be standardized. So instead of, if we yet again look to the centralized system, where you have a team that's actually building the data sets, the reports and everything. You govern the way you're actually building them. So you govern how the team works and how that operates. When you look at the distributed system, it's more about how are the interactions happening, who's interacting with what are the methods of interaction, and therefore things like seeing who the sort of audit trail, who has accessed what data at what point, what data sets are the most accessed ones, and this kind of metrics is really, really key. And that's something that we have witnessed, that if you start focusing on them very early on, you're allowed to, you can actually map this sort of ecosystem starting to spring out of this. So you have different data products being produced all over the company, and then by following the metrics, who's using what at what time, how much of the data, that actually gives a clues to the overall system, what's happening. And a lot of the tools support that out of box, but now yet again you have to create clear interfaces on how to actually study that. And then one example that what we see fairly often happening, or it must be there if we talk about distributed systems, is one place where you can discover these data sets. One place where you can discover the data products. And of course, there's a lot of capabilities that are going to be built around this. How do you get access to the data product once you discover it? How do you actually start using it, whether it's in your machine learning model or report and all of that? And of course, data catalog has a lot of answers to this. So the data catalog would be a one component within the self-serve platform, which then the different domain teams actually use. And I think that's it kind of plays a big role, and yet again the self-serve part. So we should be able, if I'm producing a data product, I should be able to push it into the data catalog in a self-serve manner, and I should be able to go to the data catalog to describe my data in a self-serve manner. So it's not that a central team is ingesting the data, but rather that I can even push my data in there and make it available for others. And that allows scaling, because now you can basically have different teams building these data as products, register them into a single place, and everything is happening as we move along. And then the governance has to be there as well to actually support the kind of governance have to be automated. So when you're pushing the data as a product to a data catalog, it should check that everything's in order. If it's not in order, it should never even land there. And these kind of things start to take shape as you move along in your journey. But those are the four principles of data mesh, talked a bit in a different manner, and I tried to highlight some of the lessons that we have learned along our journey. But then if you're about to start your journey, Maju will tell a bit more, how do you actually get started with this?
Yes, thank you, Antti. So there's 4 principles. It's quite a complex thing. I started working with the data team around 3 years ago, and the world has been like just pouring into me, and it's a very very detailed world where you need to know a lot of things, how people work around things, and people have very separate roles. And then I was kind of very into this data mesh, because for me it's really about, in a way, about design, about human-centric design. So living 3 years in a data team, like one of the biggest for me, like misconceptions about these technical people around me was, in a way, that change can be done by technology. Like, you build something, people will use it. And I was like, no, I've never seen the world like this, that it would actually happen. And then I pumped into some statistics that 80% of the data initiatives fail or do not reach kind of the outcome of what is planned for them. As a designer, I'm actually really into failing, but I really do need this failing happen immediately, very fast. Basic design thinking principles. So people in Solita, like me and Antti, we've kind of put our heads together for a longer time already, few times, like how can we actually solve these kind of challenges? Like how can we make fast value out of the data initiatives, like a business value, and how to make sure that also our clients like initiatives will not fail or would fail fast and then grow on step by step towards the goal that they are set. DataMiss is called a socio-technological approach, right? As a psychologist, I would say I bring in the kind of the human, the social part of the mesh, and Antti also will dive into the more technical part still later on the presentation. But this part is how to actually get started with this kind of a complex new approach. Start small, simply put. So there's another way. You don't need to start small. You can aim that your organization is kind of really ready to change towards more decentralized way of getting value out of your data, like planning it very well beforehand. You can have like this full-blown, well-planned transformation at one point. You can plan it so well for years even that you're kind of totally sure that now I'm ready for the journey towards the DataMiss. You've gathered maybe requirements from the different departments, different teams, different tech stacks, and you even have kind of a bulletproof plan for change management. It's like communication and events. Everything is ready. And you might think that, okay, maybe I will start where our data is actually available, where it's of the good quality, and if it's not, then you will still clean it up and make sure that it's really very ready there, and then you're right. Okay, you got really the point. It takes a long time if you want to plan everything beforehand. And we say that you should not do that. We say that you should actually not be ready or perfect or have the perfect like a process how to do it in few years. The whole change, I think you should just start. But there are some steps that we've kind of gathered from our learnings from the project that what should mean start small. So I am, in a way, human-centric design, I would say, evangelist in a way, like to the bone. I worked a lot with the project that are more like really understanding people. Like the latest one was building a community home for elderly people, like really understand how do they feel when they need to move to a home where they've lived in their home, but now they need to move to a kind of elderly care home. What does it mean for their loved ones? What about the people who are working there? Like really core deep understanding of people's needs and then build a concept on it. So in our approach, start small, that you have to find a diamond, you have to find actually a business case. So even if I'm talking about human understanding and everything, there's always the core thing that what you need to find is, in a way, money. You have to find a business problem. Antti already talked about this, a business case, something that is, you might say that it's super highly potential data use case. Anyway, something that will definitely have an impact for the business bottom line at the end. Just find it. And don't try to foresee everything like the previous slide was saying, but start with one business case, but be quite sure that this is a valuable one. If you don't know how to identify a valuable ones, maybe ask us, we'll help you, or just don't do it, because it makes absolutely no sense to start building something so big without actually having something very valuable in your hands. So Antti also mentioned it. Business case driven approach is really crucial. Antti will also introduce a little bit about this more later, but for me, like DataMiss as a socio-technological approach is really like critical to find the business case of the data. The second start small step would be the domain ownership or the data product owners. You need to start by finding a team and a person in a team who is, in a way, ready to be a owner of this new data product or the domain ownership. And we will share a little bit more about this at the last topic, because we think that this is actually the most crucial part of the DataMiss. Anyway, you will need, the second part, you will need to find a owner and empower them. The third step in our start small approach would be that you, in a way, still need to think a little bit wider, more into the future, a little bit like more abstract terms, and you need to set up the level of ambitions. It means that what kind of a goal you would have from this exercise in general, like what do you want to reach? What is a perfect, ideal, or the level that you want to, for example, reach from the data products? What is the platform vision in a way? Where do you want to go? You just quite quickly set kind of an ambition level for each of the 4 principles. You write it down. Even some of our designers draw it up, so it's kind of visually there communicable. So you'll see that, okay, this is where we want to go. And very quickly also pick up at least 1 metrics, so you will know that this is in a way guiding us towards when we can prove somehow that we actually went there. So we build a vision about the 3 or 4 principles in a way that where would you actually want to go in the future. But still start more. This is done quickly, 1 workshop, that's enough. But start the end in mind. And the 4th, start small steps would be building I call it a hypothetical data journey or data user journey. I will have an example of this. It's quite a basic design tool. So you build in a way based on the, let's take this actually. It's an example from the case that we used early on. So the journey should reflect the future, like how your teams, how your organizations are actually gonna work with this new approach. How is it gonna happen? So it is based on what kind of processes you have now. So you need to understand, like, okay, where does the company need up for the business case? Who is involved? What systems? What kind of process there is at the start? Then you find, like, how people nowadays find a data set. What would it be if we would actually have self-serve platform or more discoverable data products? How would this kind of internal process be different? Then you have probably some certain building or modeling approach already different, maybe for different teams, but then what would it be in the ideal world towards more decentralized data mesh? And then publishing. Like, what is your normal actions around publishing? Maybe there is none, but in the data mesh world, you need to have certain ways of making the data products available. So this is a crucial step. I would say even more crucial is the monitoring part. Antti already mentioned it, but when you've published data products, when you've actually kind of built them, published in, and then you need to be able to also monitor them, see if they are actually used, how they are working, are they error-free, and so on, and then how do you improve them. So it's more like a continuous process. Here I had at the end the share learnings, because there would be probably at one point many teams doing the same. The hypothetical journey should be there, and with the kind of who should be involved, what kind of tasks they would do, and then what would be in your ideal, like, future process of your organizations, your teams, that they would be more agile, decentralized, like product-driven in a way in their process, like building and consuming the data products. I don't really mean micromanaging every step beforehand, but you should take a little bit time, like, what is the status now? What would be the future journey? And take a best guess what you could do in a high level like this. But Antti will go into the more technical details of how to actually combine this kind of a hypothetical journey with the more technical architecture later in the presentation.
I could add here that you have the hypothetical user journey, so that's what we are after, that's the vision state. But we also, when it comes to the technical systems, so when it comes to the platform, we don't have to start from scratch. We can also have, and we should have, a hypothetical sort of architecture blueprint, which is kind of the visionary state from the technical perspective. But it doesn't mean that we build it and then we start using it. I'll go a bit later into how we can do that progressively also. But we have now the sort of the social side of this, and then the technical side from for sort of a visionary perspective, and then we start diving into it.
Yeah. Oops. so this is only the first part of the start small steps, right? Find a valuable business case or the use case, find the owner, set the level of the ambitions, the goals and the metrics, how you actually prove that you went somewhere, and build a hypothetical user journey. And then what we want to get some evidence actually and make it in a way, we call them also sometimes a skeleton journeys, like it almost walk, but we want to prove that what's there actually valuable and what not. So you do in a way parallel work. So this is bringing a little bit multidisciplinary people together. For example, people like me as a designer, or people who are really like diving into people's and organizations' needs and how do they behave and how would you actually change their behavior. But you anyway build the use case. You have this kind of a hypothetical journey there. You have the goals, you have the owner, you have also the team. I would pick a team who actually have a little bit capabilities there already. But you start building the use case, but you force them, you make them follow the journey because you want to see what works and what not. So this is our hypothesis of the journey, you can say, then make sure that they understand that this is not going to be final, it's just a guess. But that will kind of reflect in their real work when they are building a first data product, in this case, solving a business case, that what works and what not. You will probably find out a lot of like a lot of things that come from the technical point of view, that this is not going to happen. Like our data catalog is totally out of shape that we could even use it, or that there is some kind of structures in the teams that this is never gonna work. So you find delays, you find reasons for them, you find kind of difficulty in the ownership, you find also something around, he will talk about this platform, like, but you will find actually a lot of things that what you actually should be building into the platform, but you kind of map all these challenges. Person like me is very used to mapping problems. If you have like an new application that you need to design, you normally do an insight part there as a part of understanding like what there should be in the application. And you map a lot of challenges, bottlenecks, pain points, there's a lot of words for this. There should be 20, even hundreds, easily with weak work that these are the things that we should solve. But what would you do then? There's 100 things that you should solve in the organization. Then you really need a person who can actually like prioritize them. So I have one colleague who always introduces himself as a survey, I think, business designer, and he says he has two things in the world, two tasks. He tries to find the problem that is worth solving, and then he tries to solve it, right? But this is crucial, so you will have a lot of challenges, every organization have. But this is kind of the moment where you put your use case development team and then maybe person like me from the design background together and really kind of find out that these are the things that there must to be solved. Otherwise, we will never ever go anywhere. We might have a nice data product, but that's it. So kind of have two streams. They are intertwined. They probably are doing like work together all the time, but kind of a multidisciplinary approach, building a use case. These are kind of few examples from the cases that we've done within last, I would say, 6 months. So what are the kind of the challenges or the bottlenecks? I borrowed few quotes. I tried to make them like anonymized so nobody will know who they are. But this is from my interview when I was there was a new data lake just built and we were doing interviews a little bit, finding a use case. So I'm asking from the lead data engineer of the new data lake team, like, okay, who are the users? Because I kind of need to know them if I want to build a use case. And he said, like, okay, I don't really know. Like, I think the data scientist of the company, right? Fair guess. And then I asked, like, okay, what do they need from the data lake? And then he was really shortly like quiet. And this is very basic, I would say, in the data world. You do very separate work sometimes, and some people don't really need to even think about the users. But he was like, you should ask them. So like also pushing it away. It's not my problem. And I think one of them is called Sonia. So he kind of knew them, but also this will be a problem. You need to know as a team who builds data products what the people would need from the data products in the data lake. Another example is related to kind of the time to market. So this is a little bit high level comment, right? Also doing a similar like use case inside part, and this came often like that it takes a long time that actually there is something available, like something is actually in a table set, data set that you are able to use. And then if you have this kind of a comment, then you need to dig deeper. You also need to really understand why is this happening. Like there, I would say the main case was that it took a long time for a person actually to find the source data. Like, where would I know where this information is? I have a use case, where would it be? And then it took a longer time, many meetings, to actually find a technical person to be able to explain the data set. So this took, I would say, 2 months at least. And then there was a time when they needed to wait that the data was actually ingested in a new data lake. So it just got this kind of, the backlogs, of course, are quite long for the centralized teams. But 5 months delay for the kind of actually be able to even use the data is something you need to be solving if you want to do data mesh approach.
That's also a very interesting point, that if we think about that, we have seen this happen all the time, that actually when you start working with the data, who's the owner of the data? And you actually have to find that owner of the data. So it's a common problem that, you know, I would say most organizations have. But that's not really a technical problem. If we think about it, that's an organizational problem. And how do you solve it? It's not that you bring tech to the game, but you have to bring like designers to the game to think, okay, what's the process? How does this actually flow? What can we make? That's a huge problem. That's a lever that we can actually utilize to make this thing go faster. And how do you actually design the process? How do you find the people? Do you need to educate the people and everything like that? So not everything actually, I'm disappointed you can't solve everything with tech. I would love to do that. But that's why you need designers to kind of think, what are the actual problems? And then the solution might be something else. But that actually speeds up the whole development. So.
Yeah, I still have one example of kind of the challenges that you would be mapping and then kind of trying to really synthesize what are the most relevant challenges to solve. One of the things that keeps repeating me, which is a strange in the data world, is that lack of monitoring habits. There is some, but they're really technical normally. There is not much about users or something. And if there is this monitoring or the metric is not really used to anything. So I would say this is one of the focus areas that you need to have in your journey and make sure that this kind of a monitoring habits of the success of the data mesh in general are there. And somebody is responsible for them, and you have some kind of an ideal process of how to actually you start then fixing them and getting the kind of the whole system better. So challenges should be mapped holistically. You should also find what you want to focus on, and keeping in mind, for example, that you go to the end and have the data monitoring there also. So in a way, build and learn simultaneously so you know what to solve. And then you have one use case in hand. Very quickly, I would say really quickly as possible, you've done this. You've learned tons, and you've also be ready for the next one, right? So what would happen that you do it all again? The first part will be quicker. So you have already the skeletons already improved probably, and then you build a next use case. Maybe you have even 2 teams to do it, but still make them try to follow the hypothetical journey, and then learn on a way. And at one point, you know what to scale. Antti will talk a little bit about from the self-serve platform what this actually mean. But building case by case, maybe teams are building a new data product, but solving the use case, you actually create value because the first part is done well. You actually have a business case, but then you have a really good understanding, like what would it mean for the organizations to actually move towards more decentralized way of working. And there you go. You will give the example more technical point, yeah?
Yeah. So what's kind of interesting here is that, okay, we talk about that, you start with the one business case, and you start working on that, and that business case has to create value. And I think it's logical. If you can prove that the business case has value, you should be able to put a team on it. If it does not create value, then you probably have a hard time putting people on it. So, and how can you do that? Well, if you go through these steps, you can actually define, is it valuable before you actually build anything? So when Maiju talks about that we want to fail fast, we actually want to fail fast, and we want to fail on paper, not when we actually implemented something. So we have designers who can validate the value. There's different ways to do it. The value can be, of course, it doesn't have to be that we sell something. It can be that we improve the process. It can be that we make the work easier for us. There's multiple things that create value, but there has to be value. And if there isn't value, why are we working on it? So if you find a valuable case, what the data mesh kind of creates, it's a fast lane that is you put the cross-functional team working on the actual the case. It agrees to the standards that we have agreed, which are the governing parts, and you can actually speed that up. You can speed that work as fast as you can. You don't have to go through the centralized system and put it on the backlog of that team and wait for maybe 5 to 6 months, argue about the backlog, whether it should be prioritized or not, and then after it's been done, you might get something out of it. So the data mesh kind of creates you a possibility to create these fast lanes. And I would say we have witnessed this, that something is put into the backlog of a central team, and then when the central team looks at it, they say, okay, well, from our point of view, this is not valuable, and it's thrown out. So you're all the time arguing about someone else's backlog, and that is kind of strange. But how do you build a self-serve platform in an iterative way? So actually, it goes back to what we discussed. Who are your users? And we have the journey, and we understand what are the typical parts that are in there, and we also understand what are the typical parts of a platform. We don't have to start from scratch. Most of you probably have already some form of a platform, so you have different capabilities there. You might have warehousing, you might have ETL tools, integration tools. You already have a lot, so you're not started from scratch. And you probably know the data that you have and how it should be stored and all of that. So you can create an architecture blueprint, an idea, a vision, what it should look like. But how do these people actually use it? Well, it's the people who use it. So we have to understand who are the people, what kind of people do we have? Do we have, for example, data scientists? What kind of tool do they use? Are they SQL competent, or are they Python competent? Maybe they use MATLAB, maybe they use something else. That has a huge reflection on how does the platform have to look like. Because if it's if everyone's just if everyone is SQL competent, well, we have to provide the data products in a way that they are SQL accessible through SQL. Or if it's some specific tool that they're using, of course we have to create the platform so that it supports using that tool. Otherwise they will be doing a lot of unnecessary work. So we can do that kind of design decisions kind of upfront, and we can actually do them by interviewing people. So we don't have to, yet again, it goes back to who are the users, what are the competencies they have, what kind of technical skills do they have, where do they sit, how is the organization structured, and then we start looking into the platform and how that can support it. So we have the same journey that we had, which is the hypothetical journey. That's the skeleton. We also have, which is not shown here, is the skeleton of the platform. And now we're going to make the skeleton walk. And how do we do that? We take the first use case, and we have the user for the first use case. And we make that use case go through this journey, and we build it from scratch, for example. Self-serve platform doesn't have anything, because if we put something into the self-serve platform, it's a gamble, it's a bet, because we don't know yet how many are going to be using this. And of course, if we are very risk savvy, we can actually build the whole platform and assume that all our use cases are going to land perfectly on it. But I'm not that risk savvy, so I rather just see how it's going to go. Then we take the next use case. We have a different user. But what we realize is that both of these use cases actually store data into, let's say, an object storage. So we shouldn't put the burden to these people to actually build the actual storage, but we can take away into the platform and create a storage service, storage component for these people to use. Now, how do you actually interact with that storage? Is it, let's say, a Terraform template into the cloud? Is it a configuration file that you send to some platform team? Or is it a UI that you built? Well, that yet again depends on the users. If the users are very tech savvy, it might be that you just give them a Terraform template from a central registry, and off they go, and they actually build a very clean and nice system. But still, they don't actually have to build the Terraform template because it's already been done. It can take notification services, so it might be pushing out events every time when there's a new file in the object storage. It automatically creates the audit trail of every access that you have to the storage service. It can do a lot of things on top of it, so not everyone has to reinvent the wheel. But there's only one platform component here. Then we take the third use case. And what we also do at the same time is we validate the journey and we validate the platform. And now we realize that, okay, actually 2 of these cases used compute. They needed to transform the data somehow. Well, that's pretty common. That's a pretty safe bet that that's going to happen anyways. But here we are actually validating that through the use cases. And yet again, how are the people are actually going to use the compute? Is it going to be SQL? Is it going to be, let's say, Databricks? Is it going to be Jupyter Notebooks? Is it going to be pure code? Is it going to be Lambda functions in AWS? And that all depends on the users again. And then we take the fourth case, and we discover a new self-serve platform component. And now the access management came in. Okay, we realized that the 3 use cases, they don't have any access management. There's something fishy going on. But we have only 4 use cases. So we have to fix it for 4 use cases, not hundreds of use cases. So we can take these things bit by bit, and once we're talking about few use cases, we're talking about few data products. So it's okay if we discover something late, because we can go back and fix it. It's not a big issue. It's not a problem to fix it for 3 use cases. And well, you guess it, the 5th use case, the self-serve platform. Now there's the data catalog in there. Why wouldn't the data catalog be in the first place? We knew that it's going to be there. Well, we have 5 data products here, assuming that we don't have anything else in the company. We have 5 data products. Those people are probably working closely together. They know the data products. So the data catalog allows us to scale. It allows us, once we have hundreds of data products, to be actually discovered. But in this stage, it's okay to bring it a bit late. Now we already know that, okay, maybe the first and second use case is an object storage, and the third and fourth use case are actually, let's say, a database. So now the data catalog will have to support those, for sure, and then possibly others as well. And then the 6th use case, we get a query engine. We have discovered that all of them are using SQL. They have had to set up the query engine themselves. Now we can actually provide it to them. And maybe one of the use cases actually already built the query engine, but we now separate it into the self-serve platform and offer it as a service to others. And then the 7th and 8th and 9th and so on. What's not actually shown here, but is something that we have discovered by failing. If you build the self-serve platform and you allow different teams to actually do this, what can happen is that different parts of the organization will actually start building these data products. They will kind of go through this journey. For example, something that we did was that it was about getting data from, there was an IoT connection to different systems. And we built the first use case. We used just cloud service components, nothing else, just bare minimum, very sort of rough setup, but we were able to do it, production ready. Data is flowing from this device to the cloud. We can do analytics on it. Then we do the next case, and we realized that, okay, it's actually not you have to put certificates into these systems. but these engineers who are actually operating are comfortable with certificates. We thought that that's going to be an issue. But it was that, how do you set up the other side, the cloud side, which caused them trouble? And our assumption was fully the opposite, that they're comfortable setting it up, but they're uncomfortable with the certificates. But once we did the case, we realized it's the other way around. And then we started to build this user interface for these users, which allowed them very easily to set up the connection to the cloud. It kind of threw them a certificate. They would put the certificate into the devices, and then the data would flow automatically. So after third or fourth use case, which started to repeat, certain things started to repeat, we were actually able to do these self-serve platform components that were fitting the customer needs. But what happened was also that this part of the organization started to build their own platform. And then we discovered that another part of the organization went through the same journey and started to build their own platform. And then we had a third organization which actually built their third platform. And that became, of course, a problem, because now we have very good solutions doing a bit similar pieces here and there, but they're all over the company. So now, how do you tackle that? Well, what you do is you can have this enablement team. That's what we call it. So basically, it's a counterpart to the self-serve platform team, and it's basically there's a different ways to set it up, but basically you have parts of the self-serve platform team that are able to break away from the platform team, go into these different initiatives and help them work on it. That can actually speed start some of these different data product settings up, what you have in the organization. But what's more crucial is that it actually glues the different initiatives to the platform. Because otherwise the platform doesn't know what's happening in the different parts of the organization. But by allowing to have parts of the team break away and go into the different parts, help them get started, have different things set up, automated, promote the different platform components, and get feedback for the platform team that, hey, our data storage service is not actually functioning for this use case. We have to change it like this. And that glues the different sort of value streams to the platform team. And I think it's, if you don't have it, that kind of things can happen. And we strongly believe that you should always have the enablement team in some form of shape. It can be one team from the self-serve platform team going out, or it can be a separate unit that actually goes out, depending on the scale of the team. And then the self-serve platform, well, what we experience is usually built to the cloud. I think most of the modern things are built to the cloud. There are certain things that come out of box. Infrastructure as code, we highly recommend that. The logging and monitoring is set up. There's a way to actually do the cloud governance and what have you. There's of course cases when we have to work on-prem, whether it's regulatory reasons and so on. But usually, well, that's also then, it's also governance. It's a compute governance and data center governance, but here we have the cloud governance. And then we have development and operations. So, you know, version control, CI/CD pipelines, all of this is kind of underlying all of the self-serve components. But if these are very, very low-level cloud-based components, you want to group them up so that the people who are using it, the user experience of the platform becomes easy and nice. We did a short time ago this kind of questionnaire to data engineers, which were very, very, senior data engineers, group of senior data engineers. And we asked them that, what's the biggest struggle? What's a pain point that you would like to take away? I was extremely surprised that like 80% of them said that the infrastructure management, I don't want to do that. I just want to focus on my business problem. And to me, it was surprising because I would like to do the do the underneath thing. And these guys were saying that, hey, no, I don't want to bother. Just give me services that I can use so I can put my business case on it. So that's kind of like a true manifestation that the platform components are needed. So you don't want to reinvent the wheel, but you want to discover the right wheels to build, the right problems to solve. And then you have the governance on top. You want to have very standardized data products. You want to define what they look like. You want to define what the APIs look like. You have to define the interfaces between the self-serve platform components. You have to have clear boundaries between them so that you can actually scale. You can have different teams building them. You can even have different parts of organization building them. But you have to have clear understanding who's doing which part, what the interface is, how do you operate them, whether you need to have a UI or is it a Terraform components. All of this has to be decided, otherwise it will get loose. And that means that the self-serve platform also has to be owned. And then if we imagine what's in the middle, well, that's the data product, and that's what you built. And this might be familiar to some of you because we have had the data platform, and I think this was shown there. So it's underneath there, right? And this can act as a sort of a blueprint. These things keep repeating. This is something that we as Solida have had experience from hundreds of different data projects, and we have gathered that these things keep repeating. But you don't want to build the platform, you want to solve the use cases, you want to create value, and you can do that in a very, very small increment. But then, we think that one of the key things is the ownership. And that's kind of the core of, that's behind every single principle you have in a data mesh is the ownership. And now Maju will talk about how to empower the owner.
Yeah. And maybe still underline this, what we've learned, that there is often ownerships. There's people who are owning certain parts of the, for example, this kind of use cases, but very rarely there's really like good understanding what does it mean to own something. And as a designer, also Solida designer, if there is a new topic, you normally take a short look about like the theory background, like sociology or psychology, what do they say about. So for me, when I bumped into the book for the first time, I was like, ownership, what does it mean to me? Empowerment, what is the theory, like sociological theory behind the empowerment? There's really two small things about the theory recap that I did, but empowering a person to own something means that you need to have critical consciousness, and it means that the owner must understand kind of the complexity, both technical but also the sociological, like the realities that might inhibit it. So all this kind of starts small, understanding what's going to inhibit. The owner must be there from the beginning, so they also are aware of all the challenges that they need to be solving. It's crucial. And the second one is the term self-efficacy, which means that you need to have a feeling that you can actually change your circumstances. So also you can find ways kind of work around with the blockers or the bottlenecks or the challenges that you will facing when you're trying to build something in a more new way. So both of these topics from the sociology will happen when you have the owner there from the beginning, kind of understanding the challenges, sharing them, and then also giving them then a role that actually have something that they can work on it. Data product owner is one of the ownerships that there is in the domain ownership. When we started our first data mesh project, I mapped kind of shortly like what are all the tasks that they need to do, because it's quite a role. And there you see, it's really not comprehensive. There's only a few things, but you start with the, how was this? No, understanding kind of the user needs. A data product owner needs to do that. I don't think this is very familiar for certain data background people. Then you need to understand how to market data product. You need to understand how to monitor and improve them. You need to understand kind of how to lead a team who builds them. You need to increase maybe the kind of the data capabilities of the domain team that you have there. You need to understand the business value. And I would say this part is really like the most crucial ownership element that you need to really be understanding like what is actually the business value of the data products that our team is going to build. It's a complex role, right? And there are a lot of forces in the organizations that will not support this kind of a role. So there will be kind of indirect or direct power blocks, and for example, the older stakeholder dynamics will definitely have an impact. There will be missing skills, there will be lack of time, and so on. But this is kind of the ownership task that he or she would be doing when we are more like working in the data mesh world. And there's also one more point, which we at the moment think that this is actually a second role. It's not the data product owner. But there needs to be interaction, like communication, changing the best practices, also like the making decisions about the whole mesh. Some call it ecosystem of data, but how to make decisions. What are kind of the normal ways nowadays in your organization, but how to actually make it work in a more decentralized organization at one point, so you can actually monitor and make sure that the mesh grows and it's live and it's very well functioning and is bringing on a like a high level business value. So we also been doing the ownership in a design way. So kind of you select the owner and you really go through the task with them, and in a way like, okay, this must be, this I can handle, this could be, this I need something like education for, or maybe we need some help from the other team that would help us, and but they're like this kind of a co-designing what would mean the data product owner, like not this is the core. I could do this, maybe I want to do this, but this kind of a understanding what a person in your case could do, and then you at one point would have kind of a nice work description what you can put online, like we are searching for data product owners, but it should be really based on your context, what is there. So they would, like this means the first part, feasible and desirable responsibilities based on the real people, and then what kind of support you could build them. There would be education, maybe there is some other things that you need to help, and the core thing, these people needs to have the business focus. So somehow make sure that they understand that the work that they are doing is really bringing out of the value for the business, because that will make things run. Yeah. My favorite slide, it's a lion, but for us it has been kind of a slide that we use because it brings together in a way the humans and the tech. So what I call this kind of a way of doing or working together with the design and the data is that you reframe in your kind of a technical challenge more also into the human challenge, and that will make wonders. And how you do it, you actually go there and do it with the people who are in your team.
Yes, and that kind of concludes our presentation, and we want to summarize the key takeaways here at the end. So start with the business case, be very business case driven, just make sure that there's value in what you're doing. And what the data mesh allows you to do is to have that speed lane, that fast lane, that you empower the owners, you look for the ownership, focus on the ownership, make sure that the owner of the data product has the capabilities to do it, but also a team to do it. And when you're picking that first case, we recommend that you pick a case that has a high probability of success, of course, so that there is actually tech already. Maybe there's already tech in the team, maybe there's ownership, and there's a clear value on what you're doing. So that's a good way to kind of practice that. And once you practice that, you learn, then you take the next case, then you can take more risks and see how it goes because you know how to do it. Empower the owners, empowerment. Like Maiju said, you have to be in control of what you're doing. Therefore you have the federated governance. People have to have a possibility to say in what we govern. Do we care about these things or these things? So, for example, the metadata, what kind of metadata has to be about the data? It should be commonly agreed. So then everyone has a chance to say on what are the crucial parts. Of course, someone has to own the metadata descriptions and what are the fields that have to be there. And there is a baseline where you start building it. But everyone has to have a possibility to say that this is not working for me, let's fix it and let's move forward. And the hybrid operating model. So what we are actually saying here is that if you have the monolithic system and you have the distributed data mesh system, it doesn't mean that one day you flip. That doesn't happen. And we would even say that you will end up operating in a hybrid system. So you will have the centralized system. That will probably solve a lot of your use cases when it comes to legacy applications, for example, where you don't have the technical skill sitting next to it. So you use that what you already have, or maybe you build a system for that. But like I said, what the data mesh can bring is maybe for the 20% of your very strategic initiatives, it can create a fast lane where you can really focus on those valuable strategic initiative, have cross-functional teams owning the thing, having the business case, and actually creating value. And fail fast. Fail on paper. so if you can validate the value and it's not valuable, don't build it. If it's a regulatory reason why it has to be built, maybe you can utilize your existing system. Study it, take it one step further. If it's valuable, do we have that data? How much will it cost to get that data? What's the output of this? Validate it. You can do a lot of stuff before you build anything. And if it doesn't make sense, just throw it in the garbage and take a new one. If it does make sense, build it piece by piece, and that's where you can really learn and go case by case. That's our key takeaways, and that concludes the show. So, thank you. So now it's time for questions. If you have any, please. Yeah.
It's on. Oh. Yeah, hello, I'm Annette Hultåker from Scania, Södertälje. And I have a question about data governance in this context, and specifically about the data owner's role in the more sort of setting the principles within the company. How do you recommend that the data product owners are involved in that journey? Through data boards, any other models? Do you have any recommendations?
Well, what we like to do is to utilize whatever the company already has. So if you have, like you said, a board of owners, I would say that's a good place to start. And then bring these new perspectives to it. But it should definitely be federated even there, because you probably have different kind of parts of organization. They have very different kinds of data. They have very different kind of needs. So how do you collectively come together so that it's not, designed only from one perspective? So I think the design process is there very crucial as well. But I would say yet again, the ownership is really crucial. So you probably have a body, maybe data steward network or governance body, and they should own it and they should drive it. But it should include many people. And I think the kind of the community approach, that everyone has ability to come with their thoughts and say, this doesn't work for us. Okay, why doesn't it work? Because of this and this. And then you can take it into whether it's an extension of what you have, or then actually include it into whatever the principles are that you're working with.
And maybe shortly from my side, because this is one of the elements that you would have in this hypothetical journey. You would have these already kind of the parties that will do decisions, for example, roles that will be part of this journey. You would take the status, then you would have a short ideation like, is this actually the good way of doing the data mesh? You would also understand what is not working there and try to solve these things to actually make them fit to maybe a newer approach, maybe to have this kind of a data product owner there on top, and how does that goes together. Yep.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I'm Shankar Shastri, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. I have two questions. First one is to, if I pronounce your name correctly, to Mayo.
Oh, perfect.
There is a huge reluctance, especially from business, when it comes to adding non-technical, if I may say so, skills and perspectives like a psychoanalyst or a psychologist, designers. How do you see the trend going on, the acceptance of skills like yours, which is very much required, but it is considered as a cost? That is my first question to you. And the second part of the question is public registers. When it comes to data ownership, I come from a banking insurance. We consume data which is there from public register like state population register like SPAR or BASUN or Skatteverket. And the ownership is diluted. None of the business says it is our data, but everyone wants to share the data. So it becomes a question of ownership. So how do you see that? Thank you.
All right. The first question touches my favorite topic in a way. How to bring more like non-technical people into the technical world. I would say that the trend is rising. At least in our company, we've hired a lot of, for example, ethnographers, psychologists, sociologists for the last 2 years. So there's definitely a trend. What is challenging is to find a common language to talk about the topics. So I would say when we first met 3 years ago, it took a long time only to kind of to be able to ask stupid questions, because I don't understand what is, for example, first time, what actually means data ingestion, and he shows it to me. So this kind of ways of having maybe like short introductions, like what is master data management for a designer, what is machine learning for a psychologist, and the other way around. So you should also do like, what is design thinking, what is a user journey, what is an interview for a data person, and spend a lot of time for actually kind of put people together and make them understand each other and make them comfortable of asking a little bit stupid questions at the beginning. Because now I'm quite fluent with data language, even if I don't really never ever hands-on did anything.
Yeah, and I would add to that if we look at the journey and the journeys that we built, so Maiju of course is leading that work, but we work a lot together. So we collaborate. Like there's questions. Okay, how does this actually flow? What would you do next? And I explain the technical side. But what I get from it is the journey. So what I'm designing and architecting is a piece by piece, the platform, which is actually reflecting the journey. And what I usually have a struggle with is finding the users. Who are the actual users? How do we talk to them? How do we find their competence and so on? And there I can turn to Maiju. So I think once you start working in this way, you can show the value, but that has to happen. And I think I agree with you that it's not, from a paper, it's not that easy to do, but once you start working, it becomes quite apparent that we're actually solving the right problems, and you can showcase that, and then it becomes more easy to move forward.
And maybe shortly still, there's a lot of misconceptions about what is design. So for many, it's more like something like fashion or at least like a UI, and for me, it's not. It's part of it, but there's a lot of more like understanding, like systematically trying to make sense of the kind of the most crucial things that you need to be solving, and that is kind of relevant for any field.
Yeah, and then for the second question, I would say that there's this concept called aggregated data domains, which kind of touches upon that. So for example, if you have multiple data products within a company, but it's all the time that people are using the same data products, then doing the sort of combining of them, integrating them into a new data product, then using them. But it doesn't really land on any organization part, because it's, the data products are nicely fit, and then the user is actually utilized, like multiple users are utilizing that. That's where we have the concept called like aggregated data product, and I think I call them like virtual data products as well. So you can have this kind of team that comes together and actually solves that problem. And yet again, it's kind of from the user perspective that we see, if you have the metrics, you can actually see that it's always that these two data products are used combined. So the metrics gives you a clue that, hey, there's something going on here. And then you can actually you form that. It might be that the central team, the self-serve platform team, actually solves that. But yet again, there's value because everyone's doing this, and you can take the burden away from the teams. And I would say that the similar idea or structure fits into these outside data sources. So maybe it is a virtual team or actual team that's formed in order to ingest the data from an external system and make it available for the internal use. And it could even have some mapping if you need to consolidate it with some keys that you use internally, so that it's easy to use later on, because the external system might be using some other keys, and now you can do some form of a curation of that in between. But I would say that it's like a virtual team or aggregated team that actually doing it, and it could be a self-serve platform component in a way, actually creating a data product for the teams. But there, I think the ownership is really important yet again.
Hi, Dursun Küçükali from Ericsson. I have multiple questions for you. I will start from the easiest one,
Okay.
just to make it clear. Who is the data product owner? Is it expected a persona from the business or the technical team?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, yeah, okay. I would say that it can be either
Yeah.
one. So it has to be someone who, it's more about the mindset that, okay, we're actually creating someone for someone else. So how is the data being consumed? So you should be thinking about the users of the data. How are they actually consuming it? And also one thing that's what's really important is and what we see quite often is that you don't want to create a data product for one use case, but you rather have like multiple use cases and then see, okay, all of these people are asking for, the same data set, but that one has like 3 more columns or something like that. So you can actually create one data product that's serving multiple customers, and that's a product thinking yet again. We have seen cases where there actually has been over 500 different CSV files produced from a system. They're all for solving one case at a time, and that doesn't make sense because then you're kind of in the mess. So I would say that it can be a business person, it can be a technical person, but has to have a knowledge about the domain, what kind of data we're dealing with, where are we producing it. So I would say if we talk about marketing, it could be marketing specialist. If we talk about very, very technical thing, let's say IoT devices like, I don't know, sensor data and so on, it could be a more technical person.
And shortly add to that, maybe because I talked about designing the role. So if you have a technical person, you kind of make sure that the tasks are there. Also the more business part of the side of the tasks, and the other way around, and make sure that they're comfortable and support also the person with the parts that he's not that familiar with.
I think it is really a bit based on also maturity of the business that they can deal with the technical decisions, right? Second question is about do you normally design multiple layer of the data products or different data products in different layers, like raw, created, and so on? Because the users will have a different need, right? I mean, data scientists maybe will want to need to access a data on raw format without any change.
Yeah.
Some of them will have, I mean, mostly I'm expecting the self-service for the business in ready for the presentation layer without much transformation, I expect.
Yeah, that's actually a very good question, and I have a very good case where what we did is we shared the raw data. So we actually created a data product was more or less a raw data, and we ended up in a lot of trouble. And why did we ended up with that is that the users of the data actually had to study what the data is about. So they actually had to contact us and ask, like, what is this field and what is this field? So it wasn't really usable, to be honest. And what you kind of do if you expose a raw data, you expose the internal complexity of the system in worst case. This case, it was really worst case. It was really incomprehensible and so on. But also what happens is you actually create a coupling between the users of the data and the source system if you expose raw data. So you basically, if you, in theory, if you create a data product that's curated, that's actually transformed, in theory, you could actually change the underlying system to something else and have the same data product being published out. So the users of the data wouldn't even notice that. Of course, we're a bit in a theoretical idea here, but if we look how APIs work, like I said, you can take a lot of good ideas from APIs, and this is one of them. So you actually hide the internal complexity of the system, and you can do that same with data products. When it comes to data scientists, that's true, they usually want to deal with the raw data, but now the question is on which side they are. Are they actually consuming data? Are they from another domain wanting to consume data? If they are, they usually don't want to deal with the complexities of the. But if they are within the team, it's before it's being produced, so they are actually probably transforming that data into a usable data product and utilizing it. So I think that's sort of a difference. So I would say that not never, but you should not release raw data as a data product. There is exceptions. Sometimes the raw data is in pretty good shape and you can do that. But there is the fact that you're exposing the complexity and you're creating a coupling between the users of the data and the source system, which is not a good thing.
And very shortly, from the design perspective, for me, it means the ambition level that you are aiming with the self-serve platform. Is it meant for example, data scientists, and for example, for me? I could use some data product for my analysis when I have, for example, a questionnaire for the company. I would love to have some data products to kind of give the depth for the insight that I'm doing. Then it needs to be very different, but it can serve both. You just have to design it in a way that there is access, easily usable way of using it for very different persons. But vision is first.
And then
Okay, maybe I can give voice, but I have another question.
is it
Yeah, we
hardest
have
one?
6
Yeah,
minutes
okay, I
still.
will
So.
merge it.
okay.
Do you have a centralized framework team to set all the standards and way of working, including data modeling for building do's and don'ts? Or another question to relate to that, how to integrate the data products in the future with themselves, because it's mostly now based on the need that is populated. But when you start using it, okay, you can use it with the existing format, but when you want to integrate it, how do you control that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and it's the toughest one of them. So I would say that the you yet again you have to have ownership for the standards and what you define. And I think to start in a centralized approach makes sense. So in a central, what you have in the company is the knowledge of what kind of data you're dealing with, what kind of keys are you working with, because keys are really crucial when you start integrating the data. So what are the keys that we're dealing with? What are the global keys that are used by everyone? What are the local keys? And then out of that you can start mapping out. So okay, now I created a data product, but I'm using local keys. That's not okay. I should be using the global keys, but it should be me who actually maps the local keys to the global ones, and I only expose the global keys to the everyone else to use. How does that happen? That's a very good question, and it's not an easy one, because basically every time when you create a data product, you have to do this. You have to do the mapping to make sure that it's integratable and all of that. I believe that in after some time, we have seen, I would say that we have seen sort of reflections of it, that when you have these data products being produced, they're not fitting the model that we have. So you can't actually use them with other data sets. But what we can do and what we have done is that basically after the data product has been published, we can then start monitoring that is it actually matching the needs. So what we believe in is that you should be able to release the data products as easily as possible, but you should have monitoring before you publish the data product, but also after it's been published. So you have to monitor that it's matching on everything that you have. And what we have done is, for example, when you have published the data product, we have different kind of checks to it. Is the metadata like you said? You said that it's going to be updated once a day. When was it last updated? Is it matching? Is everything okay? And also these things that, okay, you're saying that this is a key, but it doesn't match what we have here, so could you please fix it? So it could be that you published it out with the wrong key, but once we're monitoring it, and we can automate many of these things, then you can kind of go back and say, hey, the owner, please use this instead of this, create a new version of it, and then publish it out. So, because if you do all of this processing, this very heavy process beforehand, it becomes really, really cumbersome to actually release the data products, and that's stopping the flow. And that goes back to the user journey of how can we make it as fast as possible, but still have the steps in how do we monitor this. But I would say it's not an easy question, it's not an easy problem to solve.
I'll try and be as short as possible. It's on the democratization of data, especially when you look at data catalogs. In your multiple client experiences, what are the top 3 challenges you are seeing? That is something which is what I look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Data catalogs, right? I can say one. We've met a lot of organizations where they have a data catalog, no one is using it, and they don't know the reason.
Yeah. I think the catalogs are often designed from a business perspective. So the developer experience when it comes to data catalogs is kind of in the making. So there's different ways that you can improve the developer experience. And what we have actually done is build different kind of API layers around the data catalogs to actually support that flow. And it goes back yet again to the journey. So what is the journey? If I do have a data product and I want to publish it out to catalog, what's the process? What does it look like? Do I have to contact someone to actually put it in? Can I do it myself? How can we actually speed that up? And then by discussing with these people and asking them like, what's your biggest problem? What's your biggest pain point? Why is it so hard? You can get clues and then you can start solving them. So I think that the catalogs that you have in the market are very good, but I think the developer experience could be better in many of them.
Yeah. Thank you for all the questions. We will stay here in Stockholm. Maybe we can answer the last parts. But thank you all for also very much for the audience online. I hope you enjoyed this. We had fun.
A lot.
Right?
Thank you.
Thank you.